Hi, my name's Dav and I'm a solution engineer at Itential. Today's Itential Learn video is the third in the series of videos where I show you how to use the various features of the API triggers within the Operations Manager application. Today's video focuses on how you can add a layer of validation to your exposed API trigger by assigning a JSON schema to the body of the request. Not only will this prevent corrupt or incomplete requests from creating jobs in your platform, but it also provides a way of assisting developers of your northbound systems with accurate documentation, as they'll know precisely what is required by them to trigger a workflow or a job. But first, if you'd like to be notified of more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So in the first two videos of this series, I showed you how you can map data keys in the request body of an API trigger to job variables and how you can transform incoming payload to a JSON object of your choosing. If you haven't already watched those videos, I've added a link to both of them in the description below. I strongly recommend you check those out. So the ability to expose API endpoints to your workflows is great for a whole bunch of reasons, but it's not without its pitfalls. Chief of which is you might not necessarily have the control over what those systems send you when they trigger your endpoints. This means your workflows might not do what you thought they would do if the incorrect data was sent to you. Of course, it's always important to make sure you create robust workflows with sufficient error handling and validation, but doing a ton of data validation at the beginning of your workflow is one of those things most of us would prefer not to have to spend too much development time on. This is where being able to parse the requested payload with a JSON schema is incredibly useful, as it would catch a significant number of data incompatibility issues that could be thrown at your workflow. I won't go into too much detail as to what JSON schema is and how it works, but I'll add a useful link in the description below for those of you who might want to read more upon it. So without further ado, let me add a JSON schema as an API trigger so you guys can see how it works. So with this one, I'm going to continue using the example I did for the first video, and very simple API trigger that's going to kick off a workflow. And the payload is going to be the payload that NetDevOps would send as part of their webhook integration for updating a device. So very simple. The workflow is very simple. It just queries some data. So it will query the data object. It queries the pre-change and post-change within the snapshots object. So pretty straightforward. So look, I've got a Postman job here which proves that test. So moving things along, what would happen if when the request came in, the pre-change object was missing from the request? So if we create that workflow now with that object missing, and I come to what you'll see is that I now have an error in my workflow because the pre-change object is missing, and so it will end in a failure transition. Of course, I could capture that error by doing something like capturing the failure transition, adding it to a view data, and then potentially making an API request out to the northbound system to say the data you've sent me is incorrect. Now you'd have to do that for almost every data, because the assumption is you can't really trust that the system would send the data that it needs. So that would be quite time consuming, and also sort of top load the workflow into something that would be quite complicated in terms of validation. So, and this is where the JSON schema validation comes into its own. So if I come back to Postman, let me just undo that. So the pre-change object is now back in the payload. What we can do is we can use this to generate a schema. Let me just delete that back. To generate a schema. And then I can come here to Itential development tools that we have a link to. If those of you who haven't checked it out, I recommend you come in and have a look. There's some really useful tools here. But one of them is the adjacent to schema builder. So what you can do is you can use this to generate your schema. So if I paste in my object, infer schema, and that's now inferred the schema that I want to play with. And what I can do is just to show you guys, if I come here and I just collapse the snapshots object, you can see that the pre-change and the post-change is a required element within my schema. So now what happened is that when I send in the request, it would then validate to make sure that those were present. So if I copy those over, and I come back to Ops Manager, I come in, you'll see that the default schema is there, which is just an object. So let me change that, paste that in, save the workflow. So now if I come back to Postman and I test it again, and let me remove that object again, and then re-execute that request, what should happen now is that we get an error. And the error is telling us that the required field within the snapshots object of pre-change is missing. So what that does is really it tells the northbound system immediately that there's something wrong with the data that it's sent. We don't have to implicitly capture that error within our workflow because that's been captured by the schema. So makes it super easy. That's not to say that there are other validations that you might not need to do within that, but in terms of having the complete payload coming in from the northbound system, you can define that within your schema. So the other thing that I mentioned as well in the introduction to this video is around documentation. What we also have is the ability to expose out to the northbound system to make an API request to pull that schema in. So you can see here there's a simple API that we're doing Operations Manager triggers, and then what it allows you to do is you basically specify that the trigger name is API trigger demo, and the field that you're particularly interested in is root name for that filter. So if I hit send, what that's going to do is it's now going to return the details of that trigger. Okay, and within that you're going to see the schema, and what you can do is you can provide that to the developers of your northbound system so that they know precisely the data that you're expecting as part of that request. So super useful for validation, but also super helpful for other team members within your team, within your organization, when it comes to integrating and developing network automation. Anyway, I hope you found the video informative. If you did, please click the like button and let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And until next time, I'll see you later.